I do want to start by saying first, as a Spartan, as a mother, how are you? It's been a hard week.
I'm hanging in there, it's heavy, and the sadness that we all feel pales in comparison to the trauma, and the mourning of the families and the grief and the trauma that all the students and faculty on campus feel. But I think, like everybody across our state and certainly all Spartans around the world, it's just a heavy and heartbreaking.
As governor, what do you tell people right now, especially those who have survived two or more of these shootings? And there were at least a dozen students that I talked to this week who were survivors of other school shootings.
Yeah, I mean, there are no words. I do this work because I love people and I want to, help people. And in this moment, I think showing up and taking part of vigils and asking, how we can support the families is the most important thing in this moment. But I do think, as I've said, only thoughts and prayers is not good enough. We need to take action as well. And so I'm grateful that there are leaders in the legislature who are serious about doing some common sense changes in the law. And I think, we've got to make sure that the families, have a voice in this, because they're the ones that have paid the worst price.
Have you had a chance to talk to the families of any of the victims yet?
I have connected with a couple of the patients and families that are currently in the hospital, as well as families who are mourning and in the worst grief any of us can imagine. And so I have connected with them, yes.
What do you tell them? How do you approach this? I think both on a human level, but also as governor, as a consoler in chief for the state of Michigan.
Well, I just tell them how incredibly sorry and heartbroken I am for them, and I listen and I ask them what we can do to be helpful. And I know that there are some who want to attend every event. I ask them what I can do to be helpful. The last thing I want to do is add to their burden or be a distraction in the worst moment of their lives. And some have asked me to attend some things, and some have said we're not ready to, but we'd like to talk. And so I just want to do whatever the families think is most helpful.
Part of your role as governor is that role as consoler in chief. And when I have been talking to survivors this week, a lot of them, especially students, say that they don't feel like their voices and their concerns and their fears are being heard by leaders in Lansing, in your office, in the legislature. So what do you tell them?
Well, I think, we have been trying to have some common sense reforms passed for years. I've been trying to get this done. For the first time, I think we've got a legislature that is inclined to move forward. And so I'm grateful for that. I don't take it for granted, though. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to do our part, roll up our sleeves, find common ground, because we know that there are mental health issues around the globe. We know that there's access to social media in other countries. We know that there is access to video games and et cetera, et cetera. The thing that makes the United States unique is that we are, in this country and only this country, the number one killer of young people is guns. We have more guns than we have people in this country. So having some common sense reforms to keep guns out of the hands of people that are a threat to themselves or others are long overdue. And I think in this moment, I'm grateful that there are conservatives, there are Republicans, there are gun owners who are reaching out and say, we can't do things the way we've always done. It's not working. Let's have some common sense reforms. And that's what I'm hopeful to sign into law soon.
So those reforms, I think, were introduced yesterday. They were the universal background check, safe gun storage, as well as extreme risk protection orders. All three of those here likely wouldn't have stopped this shooter. So what do you tell people who want answers about how to prevent something like this from happening? And I don't know if this is asking you to put on your prosecutor's hat or something else here, but what is the answer to something like this?
I think we don't have all the facts yet, and I am not a prosecutor currently. I know that there's information that I'm not privy to at this juncture. We do know also, though, that had there been a secure storage law in effect and had it been followed, it might have prevented the Oxford mass shooting. We know that there are reports that people had called with concerns about the most recent shooter on Michigan State's campus. Had there been extreme risk protection order on the books, perhaps that might have kept him from legally obtaining guns, assuming that he did legally obtain them, and that's what the reporting is at this moment. So there's a lot of unknowns, but what we do know is that if states like Florida and Virginia and Indiana can enact some of these common sense reforms that have been proven to mitigate some of the gun violence out there, that we have a duty to pursue that. And that's what I think should be our primary focus at this point.
How do you, as a governor, tell the state to move through this?
Well, I'm doing the best that I can, and it's hard. It takes a toll. Every one of us is feeling it to some extent or another. But my job is to stay focused on trying to support people in a crisis and put forward a plan for how we avoid or how we mitigate the likelihood of crises like this from happening again. And that's what I am putting 100% of my energy into, supporting the families, supporting the MSU community, but also working with the legislature to make sure that we do what we can to prevent something like this from playing out again in the future in Michigan.
In that idea of supporting the MSU community, the students, the student newspaper this week, the editors of that paper said, we don't want to go back to class on Monday. Do you think that students should be back in class this week?
You know what, I'm going to leave those deliberations up to the university administration. I do know that we have seen we can use technology to learn virtually. Perhaps that's a tool that some could use who are not comfortable. I can tell you, as a parent of two college-age young people in this state on a different campus, they too are struggling with just they and their colleagues on campuses all across the state are worried. And adults like me, 50 years old, 51 to be exact, can't fathom what it's like to grow up in a culture where you do mass shooting drills since, from the tender age of, preschool. So we need to support our young people. We need to listen to them. We need to wrap them with the supports they need and address their very real concerns about their safety.